India's booming economy, where the country is experiencing rapid growth and becoming the world's fastest growing major economy. There are 10 interesting signs that are indicative of the economic boom that the country is experiencing currently. The forex reserves of the country are now at 700 billion US dollars. There was a rise in exports that has now been witnessed. Now, in the latest development, the International Monetary Fund has pegged India's growth at 8%. Let's first have a look at the first 5 big developments that have taken place that has surged the Indian economy much above the other competitive countries across the globe. And you know, talking about what has led to this spurt, and it's obvious that because of the Diwali season, there has been spending that has taken place in large numbers. And mind you, there is this information, and let's take a look at this particular piece of information. Yes, there have been exports to the tune of 6 billion US dollars of the iPhones that are now currently being manufactured in India, particularly in Chennai and in Karnataka, which are at this point in time being exported all across the globe. So that's quite the feather in the cap of India when it comes to the manufacturing, where China had decided to move its facilities and brought the plants into India, shifted the supply chains into India, and therefore Apple as well as India are the mutual benefiters of this entire plan. Number 2, the India's foreign exchange reserves touched 700 billion US dollars, which is 4th after China, Japan and Switzerland. So these figures, in fact, 700 billion US dollars is something that India is at this point of time looking at, feeling as an achievement, you know, only the 4th after the other 3 countries that we just mentioned, including China and Japan. Sensex as of 31st of October was 63,591. On 31st of November, it has risen by 24.84% to 96,389. So that's the consequence of the Diwali boom, where the investors who were investing in the stock market gained benefits out of this sudden spurt. Let's take a look at point number 4, where the record car sales that have been witnessed. Now, these registrations were a record of 4,25,000 units as of October 29, and this again has seen a spurt after there was a conscious slowdown on the purchase of cars this entire month of October, which has been filled with festivities, Dhanteras, Diwali, Dussehra, all coming together. People have come out in large numbers, shown the desire to purchase, and the purchasing power obviously is very visible over here with the numbers that are just self-explanatory. Now, rise in exports. India's total exports are estimated to be 65.19 billion US dollars. This was in September 24, and the same has increased by 3.76% if we compare the same period, which is September 2023 up until September 2024. There has been an increase of 3.76% in the total exports that India at this point of time has recorded. So this obviously narrates India's success story. Engineering goods exports, where they have increased by 10.55% from 8.89 billion US dollars in September 2023. It has increased to 9.82 billion US dollars in September 2024. So there you have it. It's not just the export of iPhones, it is not just the export of other products and services, but also of the engineering goods. And now you have defense exports as well. 6,915 crore worth of defense equipment has been exported in the first quarter. This is an increase of 78% from the first quarter of financial year 2023-2024. So that's the massive huge figure. That's like, you know, this is more than 50%. This is almost, I think, about 22% short of 100% increase in your defense exports. It's standing at 6,915 crores. There is jewelry exports, yes, increase of 8.48% from 25.29 billion US dollars, which was in 2023 June, and taking a look at the corresponding figure in June 2024, it is 27.43 billion US dollars. So you see defense, you see jewelry, you see engineering goods, you see iPhones, These all have built India's economy and helped increase the GDP to 8%, which is the estimate being made by the International Monetary Fund. Quickly taking a look at the chemical exports, increase of 3.32% from 2.22 billion US dollars in June 2023. It has increased to 2.29 billion US dollars in June 2024. Let's take a look at that last figure that allows for the boom that the country at this point of time is witnessing, and which is the merchandise growth, where India's merchandise growth is currently at 5.3%, which outpaces the global average of 0.1%. So here India is leading the world when it comes to merchandising and the exports that take place in that particular category. Now here's a look at all these figures that I've just pointed out for my viewers' benefit, and I'm going to start my conversation with my panelists. I'm being joined currently by Mr. Okay, I have with me Mr. Subhash Chandra. Thank you very much for joining me. And Subhash Chandra Gargji, how do you view, first of all, this big story of the day? That's the headliner, which is 6 billion US dollar worth of exports from India of the iPhones across the globe. The exports are touted to become 10 billion US dollars by the end of the fiscal year. And even more encouraging a figure, that India's phone exports to United States of America, which were at a meager 5 million US dollars up until a few months ago, has now crossed the 2 billion US dollar mark.
So I think it's better to celebrate success in individual items of export, keeping the overall context in mind. The 6 months export growth for India in merchandise is 1%. So while individual items must have something, defense export has gone by this much, Apple exports have been this much and all, that's fine. But something else has also been giving in. And therefore, we will do well to sort of keep our eyes and ears open and heads cool by taking the overall numbers in mind. This 1% growth is actually slightly lower than the overall growth of merchandise exports in the world. Likewise, you mentioned about the GDP growth. IMF has actually not said 8% growth for 24-25. It is for 23-24. For 24, the growth estimated by IMF is 7%, which incidentally is the highest amongst the major economies of the world. So that is what we should celebrate. But at the same time, we should also take note that the growth is sort of coming down. The IMF also estimates for the next year the growth to come down to 6.5%. I think we will do well to look into the reasons why this is happening the way it is happening. Domestically, first quarter data is available, so we grew by 6.7% only in the first quarter. In the second quarter, the data is about to come at the end of this month, and it's also widely expected that it might be between 6.5 to 6.7% only. And therefore, if this kind of trend sort of gets into the remaining 2 quarters also, 7% growth might also be missed a little bit. So I think let's keep our heads cool and wait for the real numbers, and also look at these strategies. How do we actually keep India growing at 8% to 9% per annum for many, many years? Thank you.
Right, absolutely. Also, let's get in Dr. Sharad Kohli. Again, this is a resounding achievement for the economy of the country. There are a lot of factors, political will, but more importantly, the business acumen and just the sheer population of the country that is so huge, that is driving not just the GDP, not just domestic sales, and now we take a look at exports and from various categories and fields, whether it is about engineering goods or we talk about the iPhones, we talk about the mobile industry, defense equipment, defense, quite a success story over there. 78% increase from 2023 to 2024 figures.
Well, good evening, Megha, and good evening to my fellow panelists. Well, Mr. Garg comes from the power corridors, and he's got a smiling face. But I could see that smile a little wider because he wanted to show two sides of the coin, and I think the message was loud and clear. But however, that does not take away from the country the resounding progress it has made over the last few years. There's no doubt. Although, if you were to ask me, Megha, to make the list of those 10 interesting things, I would have probably changed the dimension a bit instead of deep diving only into exports, as Mr. Garg said, because some of the items of the exports may be doing very well. But the overall picture, because of the global slowdown, because of the global economy being sluggish, the overall growth hasn't been very noticeable. Therefore, I would like to look at, however, as I said, it doesn't take away the interesting growth of the country. That doesn't take away even a bit. So I would have seen it this way, Megha, if you allow me. I would have seen that 25 crore people, if they have come out of multi-dimensional poverty index, they've moved up. So I would look at it from that perspective. I would also look at it from over 100 unicorns, which the startup system has created. I would also look at it from the perspective that our middle class population now, we used to be primarily a rural, backward population primarily, but now, that number is more than 60 crores, which means that close to half the population, if not half the population, is now in the middle class. And these MPIs, the multidimensional poverty index, 25 crore people, Megha, they would also be now moving to lower middle class. Because we've changed the way we look at poverty. We don't look at poverty only from the bank balance. We look at poverty from the point whether what kind of lifestyle, what kind of living standard people have. Do they have toilet? Do they have a house? Do they have a bank account? Do they have access to medical facilities? Children have access to education, and so on and so forth. So I think the definition has changed. And I think somebody debated with me that why do you look at it? Because the person doesn't have probably 10,000 rupees in the bank account. My simple answer was, I've seen a 5 lakh person holding a bank balance calling himself poor. And I found somebody having 10,000 rupees calling himself that I'm satisfied. So I think it's a very, very relative issue. So I'm glad that Niti Aayog has come out with that new definition, and this MPI shows. I would also have seen, Megha, from the progress we made in some of the technological aspects. I'm talking of technology, I'm talking of space, and why forget the also important digitalization of the country. UPI transactions of 20 lakh crores a month, 15 billion transactions a month. I think this is a number which any country in the world can envy, that how can this country of so-called snake charmers at one point of time is now paying for the roadside coconut by way of UPI. People who are not educated, who are not literate, they just pick up their phone, scan the QR code, and the payment is done. I think this is where the real and interesting aspect, Megha, you'll have to pardon me for digressing from the points which you highlighted on the board. Whereas, however, I do agree to the individual export products you mentioned. There's no doubt. iPhones, noticeable. Defense exports, noticeable. But I've got several other parameters, Megha, which make this look even more interesting from that point of view. And there are things, glass half empty, half full is always there. My biggest concern at this point of time is the slight K-shaped recovery that we are witnessing. Okay. There is a certain class of people, Megha, who are becoming wealthier, but there is a certain class of people who are lagging behind economically. So for me, that is a point of concern. But overall, I think I don't disagree with Mr. Garg, but then I also don't take away the interesting aspects of our economy.
Okay, I also have with me Ajit Dua, and since Dr. Sharad Kohli spoke about the UPI reform that has taken place within the country and the message being sent across to the globe. Just a couple of days ago, the Spanish Prime Minister was in India. He utilized UPI to buy a Ganesh statue. The French ambassador was seen doing the same. He put out those pictures and those videos buying sweets through UPI. There have been other ambassadors in the country from various parts of the world who have been promoting and to be seen promoting on their social media posts and other platforms were using the UPI. So how important a milestone has India achieved, and how soon can the rest of the world, and particularly the West, adopt this model?
Thank you, Megha. Megha, the truth lies somewhere in between the previous two panelists, if I might say. Dr. Kohli has talked about what we have achieved in the last, say, 10 to 15 years as a bloc. 25 crore people coming out of the poverty line, digitalization having gathered space, momentum. Yeah. And whereas Subhash Garg, my colleague, has talked about what's exactly happened in the last 6 months or so, and that while there has been some achievement, exports as a whole is not one such major achievement, because after all, as we know, merchandise export from India has been hovering between $425 to $475 billion for quite some time. It's the incremental exports have been coming through from the service exports. That's how you got to the figure 67 billion in the month of September. Even if you take an average of 60, it will be around 700 billion or 720 billion at most if it is at that pace. I like to point out, having said that as a preface, I like to point out, yes, we are making a progress. So the challenges which are before the country are partly global, partly our own, in a world of the kind of geopolitics which the world is facing currently, with wars raging around, the logistics getting upset, prices going up. What we are achieving is remarkable, I would say. But I would also say that let's not get too excited about it. For instance, I give you the first subject of iPhones itself. $6 billion exports from India in 6 months, very good. Even if this pace, which is a third, 33% more than last year. Last year, during this duration, we had done about $4.2 billion. At this pace, what would we do the whole year? About $10 billion or $11 billion. Very good. But let's look at the comparative picture. Vietnam, the exports last year of two major manufacturers, first being Samsung of Korea, the exports from Vietnam alone were $52 billion. Apple exported from Vietnam worth $10 billion. So total of these two guys itself is 62 billions from
yes,
a
but
country.
Keeping in mind that these supply chains, these plants have been set up more recently in India than they were in Vietnam. And then you talk about, obviously, Samsung has, a larger customer base. People prefer Samsung to iPhone, and while there may be a particular special value that may be attached to iPhone, the truth is, even in India, there are a number of Chinese phones, whether it is Xiaomi or it is Vivo, or for that matter, even the Korean brand, which is Samsung, are more palatable, are preferred over iPhone. So like I said, a majority of the population across the globe prefers other phones to iPhone, and yes, it is important that Samsung sets up it's a manufacturing plant over here to manufacture their phones, mobile phones and other equipment. And like I said, it's going to be a trajectory that will move upwards. It will need time for gestation.
No, absolutely. If I can just finish this point, if you give, all that I'm trying to say is we've done very well compared to the past. Our PLI scheme has worked, including for mobile phones. We have to but go all the way in the value chain. We have started manufacturing components. For instance, just two companies itself. The one is Salcom, which makes the chargers. There is another company which makes the glass covers. That's a Corning company. So all these kinds of components which go into phone making, they are being made in Vietnam. And what's the number of factories in Vietnam? 28 factories for Samsung alone and 12 for Apple. We have been having the Apple factory in India since 2017. So it's not overnight. 7 years ago, the first Apple factory came here. And now there are 3 Apple manufacturers, Foxconn, Tata's and a company called Pegatron.
Yeah.
Tata had also bought up a company which existed in India, which was owned by a company called Wistron.
Yeah.
So a little bit, all that I'm trying to say is, yes, it's a major achievement. We are going in certain components the right way, and the defense exports, which you mentioned, absolutely an achievement. Here, we are the largest importer of defense equipment, but now we are also able to export. It might be as of now certain ammunition, certain small arms, but we are also getting into BrahMos missile. The
Right.
export of it to Vietnam itself, we are giving it to Philippines, and we are looking around. All that I'm trying to say, it's a mixed bag.
Okay.
Yes, we are doing well. We should, all this process would gather momentum, but it is not really, as we would say, that there is no scope for further increase. As was pointed out, there are a few issues, including building up consumption at home, which will sustain. We are a major country driven by the internal market, not the external. So unless our own consumption goes up, we would not see a sustained growth. And for that,
Okay.
government cannot be driving the entire investment process. We have to make sure the capacity utilization, consumption increases to such an extent that the private sector starts investing, capital formation by it increases
Okay.
several.
All right, sir. I'm also being joined by Mitali Nikore. Mitali, talking about, our panelists touched upon all subjects and talking about how there need to be, a lot of talk has been had since COVID hit the world, that supply chains need to move out. They are moving out from China, and there are prospective countries in the ASEAN nations and India that at this point in time are vying for the chunk, are competing for those valuable companies to come and set up base in India. We have seen just a handful of these companies, including Apple, and then you have, of course, Boeing to a certain small percentage, but largely the supply chains that were expected to come into India have not happened on a considerable scale.
Right, right. So, first of all, thank you, Megha, for bringing me into the discussion. I'd like to open with, starting to talk about the overall health of the economy very quickly. See, India has always been hailed as a consumption led economy, that India is doing well because of private sector consumption. But when we look at, for example, the World Bank's latest India development update, and we look at the projections for the next 5 years that the World Bank has made, for example, we can clearly see that the World Bank also expects India to become an industrial and manufacturing led economy as opposed to only a consumption led economy, because when we look at the growth rates of consumption, of course they are very healthy, ranging between say 5 to 6% over the next 5 years, but industrial led development, they are projecting to go up to almost 8 to 9%. And if we look at this year's increase in industrial output, it actually touched 10%. And that was because, the first time I would say in the last 3 decades or 4 decades since I've been tracking the data, that, industrial output at a national level in an annual, GDP forecast and actual numbers coming into 10%. This is a massive achievement. Now, the point which you're making of the China plus one strategy, and has India really been able to capitalize on that? I think our concern should not be around the global supply chains that are being vacated or that are being looked at as, where can a plus one country come in? We are not only interested in diversification strategies of the West. We are interested in creating new supply chains, in creating innovative products, in creating innovative services which can only be serviced by India. And that's how we can build sustainable global business lines and global supply chains around India. Right? So, when we look at the success of the IT industry, for example, an industry that has fueled job creation in India in the urban spaces, particularly, and created jobs for the millions of engineers who come out of our colleges every year, that entire industry was created outside in the West as consumers, and India servicing. So this was not a China plus one strategy. Again, going forward, when we look at new industries, whether it's going to be climate resilient infrastructure, whether it's going to be manufacturing equipment for renewable energy for companies, whether it's going to be creating equipment for, say, water treatment plants, these are industries across the world and in India that are going to grow, and that's where India should be investing and looking at creating new supply chains, new type of skilled labor, new type of manufacturing. Now we are cooperating with so many countries including Israel, for example, where water treatment technology is at the most advanced in the world. So I think this is where India really comes in, sets itself apart, and even, of course, manufacturing electric vehicles and green hydrogen are the new, growth industries of the future. And again, India is looking at these industries in a very, very serious manner. So
Right.
I think we have to really look at our growth coming from green growth, green industries, and training our workforce accordingly.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.